Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight we're going to start out with Albert Freedman, who died recently at the age of 95. And Albert Freedman was a television producer, or at least he was for a while. He was involved in the quiz show scandals of the 1950s. Specifically on the show 21, he was the man who recruited Charles Van Doren to beat Herb Stempel, and that was the event that precipitated the whole quiz show scandal of the 1950s, got Charles Van Doren indicted. We talked about Charles Van Doren before, and changed the whole tenor of television. In the Robert Redford movie Quiz Show, which was a sort of a semi-fictional documentary of the quiz show scandals, Albert Freedman was played by Hank Azaria of The Simpsons. I'm going to play a portion of an interview with Albert Freedman, and he gives you a completely different take on the whole thing. No doubt part of it is self-serving, but I think he makes a very good pointer. Albert Freedman has always contended that the quiz shows had to be fixed to a certain extent because otherwise you wouldn't have very good television. People would forget answers, they would freeze, and if that happened too often, people would simply turn them off. So he had to add an element of drama to the whole quiz show format. He contends that what he was doing was far less disingenuous than what Robert Redford and Disney were doing in the movie Quiz Show, where they injected an element of drama mixed with fiction to serve a certain political agenda. Here's what he says.
When the movie was still in production, a friendly newspaper person sent me the script. I looked in the script and I found that it was nothing to do with me or actually what I knew to be true. I went to my lawyer, told Roy Grutman that I'd like to have him correspond with Robert Redford and tell him that I would be available gratis to tell him what went on, the truth. So if he's going to do a film, especially using my name and identifying me, at least talk to me first so I could tell him what actually went on. If he's not going to use my name, then he doesn't have to talk to me. A letter came back to my lawyer from Redford's lawyer saying, we know the law, that's all. They went ahead and made this film. It was as controlled, as fabricated, as fixed, or much more so than the shows I produced, because they used real names in the PR that was done by Mr. Redford in a budget that Disney possibly paid about $20 or $30 million, I read. And it was a highly publicized film. Redford stated the reason he did the film is that my show was the beginning of the demoralization and the decadence of the United States, resulting in the Vietnam War, in Watergate, resulting in the breakdown of American morality, and a number of other things.
You were responsible for it.
I'm responsible, yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I must tell you, I'm very guilty, because the fact that I'm responsible for the Vietnam War was a big surprise to me. I really had no idea. I wish there was something I could do about it. And the fact that it's my fault that Nixon turned out to be a crook, and my fault that Johnson decided to use the Bay of Tonkins, lied in the Bay of Tonkins to set up a war that turns out to be a phony war. And I guess it's my fault that the corruption in this country, as manifested by the number of companies which have violated the law, broke the law, and have been fined, be they companies who provide armaments or aluminum or today petrol, gasoline. I mean, the corruption on America and the buying of politicians, it's all my fault. I taught them how to do it. There was no Boss Tweed years ago. There was no corruption with politicians in this country.
It all started in 1956.
It all started, with Charles Van Doren.
You went to see the movie?
Yeah.
What was your reaction when you came out of it?
I was very angry. My first reaction was, this is a free country. They can't get away with this. This is libel. If they're using my name, and at the end of the film, they say that I'm working with Penthouse International, they just can't get away with it. So I went to see a lawyer, and he says, you're right. He said, you want me to work on it? I said, yeah. He says, well, could I have $10,000 up front? He said, it'll probably cost you over $100,000. And then he said, but you have to know that you're dealing with a huge corporation, and even if they lost, which they probably would not, with their battery of lawyers, they would appeal it, and they would bankrupt you. So there was my experience with, quote, the family company that owns Disneyland and that hired Robert Redford and worked with Robert Redford in a motion picture that hurt me and the people in the film. My television show The shows that I did, to my recollection, never hurt anybody. All the people I had in my show, those who made a lot of money, made them very happy. It changed their lives. My shows provided a lot of entertainment, made a lot of people at home very happy, sold a lot of television shows. I have no guilt about that.
I think he meant sold a lot of television sets, which he did. And he gives you a different perspective on the whole quiz show scandal, one which I think has some merit to it. We're going to move on now to Jonathan Demme, who died recently at the age of 73. He was the American film director best known for directing The Silence of the Lambs with Anthony Hopkins and Jodie Foster, and also Philadelphia with Tom Hanks. BBC4 Last Word did a nice piece on Jonathan Demme, so here is Matthew Bannister with it.
The American film director Jonathan Demme was best known for making The Silence of the Lambs, which became only the third picture in history to win all 5 major Oscars. But his work ranged across many different genres, from rom-coms to documentaries, as well as feature films. Jonathan Demme started his career as a film publicist. He began directing under the tutelage of the well-known B-movie director Roger Corman, who'd also developed the careers of Francis Ford Coppola and Peter Bogdanovich. Jonathan recalled his approach to learning his trade.
I thought, oh my God, how do you do this? And then I thought, I know how I'm going to attack this job. I'm going to sit down at this little desk in the apartment I'm staying in every night, and I'm going to write down all the things that I'm worried about. And then the next day, I'll try to scratch them off the list. And that's really what filmmaking, in a way, is all about.
After cutting his teeth on the women in prison movie Caged Heat, Jonathan Demme moved on to more big-budget fare. He won critical acclaim, but not box office success for a number of pictures before his breakthrough with Silence of the Lambs. Film critic Larushka Ivanzadeh.
Everyone passed on it in Hollywood. Everyone thought, what's this lurid film about this cannibalism and serial killing? And no one wanted to touch it. Apparently when Demme read it, he saw it not as a horror movie, but he said, this is a story with a great female lead. What interests me about this story is it's about one strong female, young FBI agent played by Jodie Foster, who was trying to save this other young woman who'd been taken by this serial killer. So for him, that was the heart of the story. And in a way, when you look at Silence of the Lambs, it's almost weirdly like a rom-com. If you look at it, it's this romance, and it was actually released, I think, on Valentine's Day. It also had Demme's signature stylistic move in it, which is the big close-up. When I remember watching Silence of the Lambs, I saw it on this huge screen, and what I remember is Anthony Hopkins' face filling the whole screen.
A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Silence of the Lambs came in for a lot of controversy about the portrayal of, basically, they've got this transgender serial killer in it, and the LGBT community were very up in arms about the portrayal of sexuality. And Demme, he was a liberal humanist. He was very concerned about this, and so he was very keen to make Philadelphia. It was meant to be an everyday story of 2 gay men in a relationship, which was something that's not seen on screen, hardly at all, definitely never in Hollywood, with Tom Hanks, of all people, this everyday all-American guy, playing this gay character opposite Antonio Banderas. What I think is unusual about it is that Demme, with trademark humility, made it not for his liberal New Yorker friends, but he deliberately went out to make a mainstream film that would aim at suburban, mall-going American mainstream audience.
Didn't you have an obligation to tell your employer you had this dreaded, deadly infectious disease?
That's not the point. From the day they hired me to the day I was fired, I served my clients consistently, thoroughly, with absolute excellence. If they hadn't fired me, that's what I'd be doing today.
And they don't want to fire you for having AIDS, so in spite of your brilliance, they make you look incompetent, thus the mysterious lost file? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Correct, I was sabotaged.
Having won the Best Director Oscar for Silence of the Lambs, presumably there's a sort of pressure on you to follow that up with even bigger and better films. Did he feel that pressure, and did he succeed in making bigger and better films?
I think the thing when you look at Demme's career is he has these 2 massive hits, which are Silence of the Lambs and Philadelphia. And then it's sort of like, he did a version of Beloved, the Toni Morrison film, but it wasn't like he had another really huge hit. And I think when I met him for a film called Rachel Getting Married, which was, an Oscar-nominated film in 2008, I was like, what happened to you? What happened? What's happened to your career, basically? Did you have a massive bust-up with Hollywood? Where did you go? He said to me that he felt exhausted by the Hollywood system and having to work within it. But I think he was interesting and he was a genuine creative. He just followed his heart and where it led him. And so he made all these weird stories. I mean, that's the thing. He started off making this kind of crazy women in prison exploitation fix. And then he made sort of films about an agronomist in Haiti. He made a film that was sort of a documentary film about making an Ibsen adaptation. He just did what he kind of wanted to do.
And let's talk about the Talking Heads documentary that he made, because that was much acclaimed. What was his approach to the subject?
Stop Making Sense in 1984, this Talking Heads concert film. Really a film about the process of making art. You see David Byrne looking very young and gawky in this big white sort of suit, looking quite strange, but it's about how he put the show together. Normally in a concert film you sort of have all the sort of explosions and then you cut to the audience going, yay, looking really adoring. And he didn't cut to the audience at all until right at the end of the film. So it's much more almost like a theatre piece.
A lot of people have paid tribute to Jonathan Demme's humanity, and that seems to be a quality that the actors who work with him and the critics who saw his films and liked them think was defining.
I think the thing that stood out about Jonathan Demme was he was the gentle soul. You know, when I met him, the thing that came across, he was very humble and kind and boyish. There's this festival in LA, I think, called Jonathan Demme Iconoclast, and he's seen bounding onto stage. He's at age 71, he's wearing like tracksuit bottoms and a baseball cap turned backwards, and you know, he just has this boyish enthusiasm for life.
Music from the soundtrack of Stop Making Sense, directed by Jonathan Demme.
We're going to move on to our feature now. By way of introduction, there's this.
When tomorrow is today, the bells may toll for a song. But nothing can change the shape of things to come.
Well, the bell will no longer toll for the Whitechapel Bell Foundry, which is dying after 547 years. It's the oldest manufacturing firm in Britain, and it's closing as a result of reduced demand and high property values. Here is the Telegraph. The world's oldest bell foundry, which made Big Ben and the Liberty Bell, is closing after 500 years. The Whitechapel Bell Foundry, based in London's Whitechapel, has long been the international center for bespoke bells, but the family-run business has announced it is now set to close due to the changing realities of running a niche business. Listed in the Guinness World Records as the oldest manufacturing firm in Britain, the company was formed in 1570 during the reign of Elizabeth I. The family business had close links to the royal family, and owners Alan and Catherine Hughes said it was with a heavy heart they had taken the decision to close the business. Despite diversifying into manufacturing doorbells and creating an online store a few years ago, the owners have taken the difficult decision to close the firm. We've made this decision with a heavy heart, but in response to the changing realities of running a business of this kind. The Bell Foundry in Whitechapel has changed hands many times, but it has always been a family business, Mr. Hughes said. My own family has owned the foundry since 1904, but other families have run the firm through its history, which stretches back to 1570. The business has been at its present site over 250 years. The mold for Big Ben still hangs on the wall of the foundry. It was the largest bell ever cast by the firm in 1858, weighing 13.5 tons. It is responsible for many acclaimed bells worldwide, from creating the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia in 1752 to the bells for St. Mary's Cathedral in Sydney and the U.S. National Cathedral in Washington. More recently, it cast the Royal Jubilee Bells, a set of 8 bells featured in the Thames Jubilee pageant in 2012. Following September 11th, the firm was the first choice to create a lasting tribute of a bell to mark the tragedy as a gift from London to New York. Members of the royal family, including the Queen and Prince Charles, have conducted a number of visits to the foundry. It has been several centuries since the boom years of bell making, yet the foundry has found ways of adapting to modern times by making traditional doorbells popular among people restoring Victorian properties. Quality craftsmanship takes time. The average time from inquiry to order is 11 years, and the longest commission in the foundry's history took 100 years to produce. Ordered installation takes another year, and a major project could cost as much as £250,000 to produce. Mr. Hughes, who learned the craft from his father, previously told the Telegraph, "We've survived because we produce stuff that people want. That means constantly adapting. You do not remain in any business if you keep saying no. 20 years ago, we didn't provide any doorbells. We're a tiny market, and at the end of the day, there aren't many churches being built now, but people still love the sound of bells, and that's what has kept us going." The firm has been at its premises on Whitechapel Road since 1670, previously a coaching inn called the Artichoke that was damaged in the Great Fire of London. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. And because the Whitechapel Bell Foundry made the Liberty Bell, we're going to close with the U.S. Marine Band playing John Philip Sousa's Liberty Bell March. This is also for all you Monty Python fans out there.